Atlantis was never just a myth. That's what they want you to believe. Have you ever wondered why such an advanced civilization has been deliberately labeled as fiction in our history books? Why powerful institutions go to such lengths to dismiss it as fantasy? The truth is, Atlantis wasn't lost to the ocean. It was hidden from your consciousness. And if you've always felt that gnawing sensation that something essential is missing from our world, that feeling isn't random. It's recognition. I'll never forget standing on that beach in Greece, watching the sunset when it hit me like a tidal wave. The answers I'd been searching for weren't in any books or teachings. They were encoded in my DNA, waiting to be remembered. If you're new here, hit subscribe now, because what I'm about to reveal about Atlantis is the knowledge they don't want spiritually awakened people to access. This isn't speculation. It's the missing piece of your spiritual identity. The story of Atlantis isn't just some ancient legend. It's the hidden blueprint for human consciousness that explains everything from your unexplainable intuitive abilities to why our modern world feels so spiritually empty. What I discovered about Atlantis will transform not just how you see history, but how you understand your own extraordinary spiritual potential. Are you ready to remember what you've always known deep inside? Origins of divine alignment. What if I told you that beneath these waters once existed a civilization so advanced that our modern technology looks primitive by comparison? Not in terms of machines and computers, but in terms of consciousness technology. The elites don't want you to know this, but the evidence is hiding in plain sight. Look across ancient cultures, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mayan codices, Sumerian tablets. They're all describing the same lost civilization using different names. This isn't coincidence, it's memory. When I first uncovered the suppressed truth about Atlantis beyond the sanitized myths, I couldn't sleep for 3 days straight. Their technological capabilities weren't just advanced. They were operating on principles our modern science refuses to acknowledge. During my meditation retreat in Egypt, an elder shared ancient texts describing Atlantean cities built with crystalline structures, arranged in perfect concentric circles. These weren't just buildings. They were literal consciousness amplifiers, designed according to sacred geometrical principles that channeled cosmic energies. Imagine waking up tomorrow in a world where everyone, and I truly mean everyone, could naturally sense each other's thoughts and feelings, where healing happened through directed energy rather than chemicals, where technology wasn't separate from consciousness, but an extension of it. This wasn't fantasy. This was Atlantis. You've been programmed to believe that human history is a straight line of progress from primitive to advanced. But what if that's the greatest lie ever told? What if we're actually living in the spiritual dark ages compared to what once existed? The Atlantean governing council, known as the Temple of the Seven Rays, consisted of individuals chosen not for their wealth or charisma, but for the actual frequency their hearts emitted. Can you imagine how different our world would be with leaders selected for their spiritual vibration rather than their ability to manipulate? I believe this golden age of Atlantis isn't just lost history, it's suppressed potential. When I connect with this knowledge, something deep inside me resonates with truth beyond any words I've read in ordinary history books. And if you're feeling that same resonance right now as I speak, that's not coincidence. That's recognition. Your soul remembers. The spiritual schism. The fall of Atlantis wasn't some random natural disaster. That's the watered-down version of history they feed you to keep you from understanding the real warning. What very few scholars will admit is that Atlantis destroyed itself through the same spiritual corruption we're witnessing in our world today. The parallels are so exact, it's frightening. As Atlantis reached its golden age, a dangerous divide emerged. Two distinct spiritual ideologies formed, that would ultimately determine the fate of this advanced civilization. One group, called the Children of the Law of One, maintained the original understanding that all beings are connected expressions of a single divine source, and that our highest purpose is service to the whole. But another faction emerged, known as the Sons of Belial. Pay close attention to what happened next, because this exact pattern is repeating in our world right now. The Sons of Belial didn't start as evil. Their shift began with something seemingly innocent, intellectual curiosity about the mechanics of creation. But this curiosity slowly twisted into something darker, a belief that they could improve upon divine design, that they could become gods themselves. I've spent years studying ancient texts that were deliberately kept from public knowledge, and they all confirm the same pattern. When spiritual knowledge becomes separated from heart wisdom, disaster is inevitable. Look around at today's spiritual marketplace. Notice how much of modern spirituality has become about manifesting personal desires rather than serving the whole, about enhancing the ego rather than transcending it, about gaining power rather than cultivating compassion. That's exactly how it started in Atlantis too. The Sons of Belial didn't openly reject spirituality. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they repackaged it using words like sovereignty and empowerment. They asked questions like, is serving higher principles true freedom or just cosmic submission? Sound familiar? It should. Check the Instagram feeds of today's most popular spiritual influencers. Many are selling the exact same philosophy that destroyed Atlantis. What happened in Atlantis mirrors exactly what's happening now. A spiritual community divided between those who approach spirituality as surrender to something greater and those who see it primarily as a tool for manifesting personal desires. This ancient split isn't just history, it's playing out inside you right now. Every time you encounter a spiritual teaching, you face the exact same choice the Atlanteans faced. Will you use this wisdom to serve something greater than yourself, or just to make your ego more spiritual and special? The fact that most people don't know this is an accident. It's by design. Descent into shadow. As the philosophical division deepened, Atlantis began a gradual descent. Not an immediate fall, but a series of subtle compromises, each seemingly justified by pragmatism or progress. The Atlantean understanding of consciousness as the foundation of reality gave them capabilities that modern science would consider impossible. They could manipulate matter through concentrated thought. They could capture and transfer life force energy. They could even alter the genetic codes of living things to create new forms. These abilities weren't inherently destructive. Indeed, for thousands of years, they had been used for healing, for cultivation, for harmony. But as the Sons of Belial gained influence, these same technologies began to serve different masters. Imagine the temptation. If you could manifest matter from thought, why limit yourself to what naturally exists? If you could transfer life force, why not accumulate it for greater power? If you could alter genetic codes, why not improve upon what nature had designed? The decline in consciousness didn't announce itself with dramatic failures, but with subtle redefinitions of success. Technologies once used for healing were adapted for enhancement. Rituals once designed for communion with higher realms were modified to command spiritual energies. Educational systems once focused on wisdom began to emphasize power. The most dangerous corruption, an Atlantean text warns, is not the rejection of light, but its redirection toward the self. This is what makes the Atlantean story so profoundly relevant for every spiritual seeker today. The line between spiritual sovereignty and spiritual arrogance is razor thin, and the consequences of crossing it are rarely apparent until it's too late. Think about your own spiritual journey. Have you ever noticed how easily the ego can co-opt even the most sacred practices? How meditation intended for presence can become a pursuit of special experiences? How teachings meant to dissolve the self can be used to enhance it? The Atlanteans didn't descend into darkness because they lacked knowledge. They fell because their knowledge outpaced their wisdom. They didn't lose their spiritual abilities. They redirected them toward increasingly self-serving ends. As this transformation accelerated, the physical manifestations became more apparent. Atlantean society, once egalitarian in its abundance, became stratified between those who commanded spiritual technologies and those who merely benefited from them. The crystalline cities, once perfectly aligned with earth energies, were expanded and modified with less regard for these harmonies. Perhaps most troubling was the development of what modern terminology might call psychic technology, devices that could amplify, store, and direct consciousness itself. What began as tools for healing and communion eventually evolved into instruments of influence and ultimately control. Consider the warning this presents to our own civilization, where technologies of consciousness, from brain-computer interfaces to advanced psychological manipulation, are developing rapidly without the wisdom framework to guide them. The Atlanteans didn't suddenly choose evil. They gradually redefined good until it became unrecognizable. Moral and ethical corruption. As consciousness became increasingly seen as a tool rather than a sacred gift, Atlantean society crossed critical ethical threshold that accelerated its spiritual decline. The most concerning developments emerged in three domains: their relationship with nature, their use of consciousness technologies, and their experimentation with life itself. The Atlanteans had always shaped their environment, but they had done so as stewards in conscious co-creation with the natural world. As their perspective shifted, this relationship transformed from partnership to dominion. Rather than honoring the wisdom inherent in natural systems, they began to view nature as raw material awaiting their superior design. Does this sound familiar? It should. Our modern civilization treads this same precarious path. More troubling still was the evolution of consciousness technologies. The same crystal-based systems once used to amplify healing energies were adapted to broadcast specific thought frequencies. Initially developed to create harmonious environments, these technologies gradually became tools for influence. Records describe crystal towers that could transmit emotional states across entire regions, ostensibly to promote peace and well-being, but eventually weaponized during conflicts between factions. But perhaps the most consequential ethical breach involved their manipulation of life itself. The Atlanteans' understanding of consciousness as the foundation of physical form gave them capabilities to alter genetic codes through focused intention, amplified by their advanced technologies. What began as healing interventions expanded into experimentation. They created hybrid species, modified existing ones, and eventually began to alter human genetics itself, not for healing disease, but for enhancing capabilities or expressing ideology through biological form. Ancient texts speak of laboratories beneath great temples, where consciousness was severed from its divine connection, where beings were created with extraordinary capabilities but diminished spiritual awareness. These experiments represented the ultimate corruption of knowledge, the separation of power from wisdom, of capability from compassion. As these ethical boundaries were crossed, Atlantean society fractured further. Those still aligned with the law of one retreated to specific regions and temples, while those following the sons of Belial gained control of major power centers. What had begun as philosophical disagreement evolved into physical separation and eventually into conflict. This corruption wasn't limited to elites. As the prevailing consciousness shifted, so did the collective. Citizens who had for generations lived in spiritual awareness began to prioritize material comfort and psychic power over divine alignment. The most profound corruption wasn't technological or even ethical, it was spiritual. A civilization founded on the principle that all existence emerges from and returns to divine unity had gradually embraced the illusion of separation. This fundamental error in perception made all other corruptions possible, and herein lies perhaps the most important lesson for us today. No matter how advanced our technology, how sophisticated our understanding, how expanded our consciousness, if we lose our recognition of our place within the divine whole, we have lost everything that matters. The cataclysm. The end, when it came, wasn't merely a physical catastrophe, but the culmination of a spiritual process set in motion generations earlier. Ancient records describe a civilization that had reached pinnacles of achievement even as it descended into spiritual shadow. Crystal cities gleamed beneath the sun. Vessels traveled through air and sea without physical propulsion. Magnificent temples drew energies from the cosmos itself. Yet beneath this external glory, the spiritual foundation had eroded beyond recovery. The final chapter began not with natural disasters, but with conflict. The philosophical division that had long separated Atlantean society erupted into open warfare. Not merely physical combat, but psychic battles that deployed the very technologies that had once served healing and harmony. Imagine consciousness itself weaponized. Crystal amplifiers broadcasting fear or rage across entire regions, devices controlling weather patterns to devastate opposing territories, psychic attacks targeting the leadership of rival factions. This was no ordinary war, but a conflict that violated the very foundations of natural law. The ancient records speak of a critical threshold being crossed when the sons of Belial deployed their most dangerous technology, massive crystal arrays designed to tap directly into the Earth's energetic grid for unprecedented power. They sought to harness the very heartbeat of the world, one account describes, not in reverence, but in conquest. The warnings came first as increasingly destructive natural phenomena. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, sudden storms, as the planet itself responded to these violations of natural harmony. But rather than recognizing these signs, the competing factions intensified their efforts, each believing their approach would ultimately prevail. The final cataclysm wasn't a single event, but a cascading series of disasters, both natural and technological. The massive crystal energy collectors, pushed beyond their limits, created distortions in the Earth's electromagnetic field. These distortions triggered seismic instabilities that released pressures long held in balance beneath the Atlantean continent. What followed was catastrophic beyond imagining. Massive explosions, some natural, some from the rupture of energy technologies, tore through the crystalline cities. Earthquakes of unprecedented magnitude shattered the land itself. And finally, as the very bedrock destabilized, the waters rushed in. Those who maintained their spiritual awareness had heeded the early warnings. Ships had been prepared. Migrations to distant lands, particularly Egypt and what would later be the Americas, had already begun. Sacred knowledge was preserved in crystals, tablets, and most importantly, within the consciousness of those who remained aligned with higher principles. As the waters closed over the last remaining temples of Atlantis, something profound occurred in the collective consciousness of humanity. The fall of this great civilization created a traumatic imprint, a psychic wound in the species memory that echoes through us still. The very vibrational frequency of the planet was altered by this catastrophic failure of spiritual stewardship. This is why the story of Atlantis resonates so deeply within your consciousness, even now. It isn't merely historical curiosity, it's cellular memory. Something in you recognizes this tale because part of you experienced it, carried forward through the long spirals of incarnation. And perhaps most importantly, something in you knows we approach a similar threshold today: legacy and awakening. The physical destruction of Atlantis was not the end of its story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's spiritual journey, one that continues to unfold through each of us today. As waters claimed the last Atlantean temples, the survivors carried both the wisdom and the wounds to distant shores. These refugees weren't merely individuals seeking safety. They were consciously chosen emissaries, preserving essential knowledge for future generations. To Egypt, they brought architectural knowledge that would later manifest in the perfect alignments of the pyramids. To the Americas, they carried understanding of celestial cycles that would inform Mayan and Aztec calendars of astonishing precision. Throughout the Mediterranean, they established mystery schools that would eventually influence Greek philosophy, Hermetic wisdom, and esoteric Christianity. But perhaps their most important legacy wasn't information but initiation, the transmission of states of consciousness that had been the birthright of Atlantean citizens. These consciousness technologies were no longer entrusted to civilization as a whole. The hard lesson of Atlantis had demonstrated that collective wisdom develops more slowly than collective capability. Instead, this knowledge was preserved within mystery traditions, accessible only to those who had proven their ethical and spiritual readiness through years of preparation. This is why so many ancient spiritual traditions share similar patterns. The careful evaluation of initiates, the progressive revelation of knowledge, the emphasis on ethical development preceding power. These weren't arbitrary restrictions, but direct responses to the Atlantean catastrophe. Yet even as this wisdom was preserved among the few, the many carried the trauma forward. The sudden vibrational descent experienced during Atlantis' fall created what some traditions call the forgetting, a veil that descended upon human consciousness, separating us from our direct perception of divine reality. This forgetting wasn't punishment, but protection, a compassionate response preventing immature consciousness from accessing powers it wasn't prepared to steward responsibly. And here we arrive at why this ancient story matters so profoundly for you right now. We stand at a remarkably similar juncture to the Atlantean crossroads. Our technologies, from artificial intelligence to genetic engineering, from quantum computing to consciousness research, approach capabilities that the Atlanteans would recognize all too well. Yet simultaneously, a spiritual awakening ripples through humanity. More and more individuals sense the artificial nature of the veil, glimpsing beyond it through meditation, plant medicines, near-death experiences, and spontaneous awakenings. This isn't coincidence. The cycle that began with the fall of Atlantis approaches completion. The wisdom preserved through millennia of mystery traditions now emerges into public consciousness. The psychic wound created by that ancient trauma presents itself for healing. The question before us, before you, is whether we will repeat the Atlantean era or transcend it. Will we develop technologies of consciousness without the wisdom to guide them? Will we pursue spiritual powers without the ethics to contain them? Or will we finally integrate what Atlantis divided? The memory of Atlantis lives within you not to inspire fear but awakening, not to predict doom, but to prevent it. You are not merely learning about an ancient civilization. You are remembering a crucial chapter of your soul's journey across time, and in that remembering lies our collective healing. Wisdom crystallization. There's a reason why this knowledge about Atlantis has been systematically erased from mainstream education and ridiculed when it emerges. If enough people remember the truth, the current power structures couldn't survive. When I first pieced together the full Atlantis story from sources most people never get access to, I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that I wasn't just learning something new. I was remembering something my soul had always known. And right now, I can see many of you are feeling that same recognition. That's not coincidence. So what do we do with this forbidden knowledge? Here are the 5 essential truths they don't want you to integrate into your spiritual practice. First, advancement without alignment always leads to destruction. The Atlanteans didn't fall because they lacked knowledge. They fell because they severed knowledge from wisdom, capability from compassion, power from purpose. Second, and I check myself on this daily, watch the line between spiritual empowerment and spiritual ego. The moment you think you're special because of your spiritual gifts or knowledge, you're already walking the same destructive path as the sons of Belial. Third, technology itself isn't the problem, it's the consciousness behind it. Those crystal technologies that once healed in the hands of those aligned with unity became destructive when wielded by those who'd forgotten their connection to the whole. This is why our modern technology feels so hollow. Fourth, and this completely transformed my own practice, character development must come before power development. The ancient mystery schools made initiates wait years before teaching them the powerful techniques for this exact reason. Ask yourself, am I ready to steward what I already have before seeking more? And finally, this still gives me goosebumps. We aren't doomed to repeat their fall. The fact that so many of us are awakening to this knowledge now isn't random. It means we have the chance to heal what was broken then. The most powerful message I ever received came from a woman who wrote, "For years, I've had recurring dreams of crystal cities sinking beneath waves. After watching your videos, I finally understand I wasn't dreaming, I was remembering. This is happening everywhere now. People are remembering who they truly are, beyond the limitations they've been programmed to accept. If this hidden knowledge resonated with your deepest truth, hit that like button and subscribe right now. It literally helps this information reach others who are ready to remember. More importantly, type "I remember" in the comments below if you felt that spark of recognition while watching. I read every comment, and the algorithm will make sure this crucial information reaches others who need it. Until next time, remember, you're not just learning about some myth, you're remembering who we were, recognizing the trap we've fallen into, and most importantly, reclaiming the extraordinary consciousness that is your birthright. The Great Awakening has already begun, and this time, we get to write a different ending.